Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. This is Dr. Halima, and today's lecture is number 3, and the title of this lecture is What is Translation Theory? It's a bit dry, but we hope that you will be able to understand it. It's very important to understand this particular lecture because it's the basic of really understanding translation, whether it is in theory or in practice. Now, what we will do in this lecture, you will have the learning outcomes, then we will talk about the meaning of the term theory. We need to understand what we mean by the term theory, and then we will the definition of a theory. We will define a theory. Then we will give you a definition of a model. Then we will be talking about the main characteristics of a useful model, and then we will talk about the translation theory, what we mean by translation theory. And the last item, I will give you the concept of Peter and Newmarks of the translation theory. Now, by the end of this lecture, you should be able to show some understanding of what is meant by theory of translation. Not only that, you should also be able to show knowledge of the main requirements for a theory of translation. Again, you should be able to make your own concept of translation theory. If you could really achieve these 3 learning outcomes, not only you would be very happy with yourself, but I would be very impressed by what you have achieved, because it is very, very important to understand this lecture, the theory. All other lectures are based on this concept of theory. Now, if we start by the meaning of the term theory. Now, theory, the English word theory, was really derived from a technical term in ancient Greek philosophy, the word theoria. What theoria meant was looking at, viewing, beholding. That was the meaning of theoria in ancient Greek philosophy. Now, this particular word refers to what? To contemplation or speculation. To contemplate. To contemplate means to think about, to ponder. Speculate means, again, to have some ideas. Contemplation and speculation are opposed to action. So this is the rough meaning of the theory, the word theory or the term theory. In ancient Greek philosophy, and now theory especially often contrasted to practice from a Greek praxis. In other words, theory is the opposite of practice. And even in ancient Greek philosophy, they used to use them as opposite. One has something to do with speculation, thinking, idea, and one is related to action, practice. Now, let's come back to our modern times. That was in ancient Greek. Now let's see what the meaning of the term theory in modern science. Now, if you ask your colleague or anybody you know, what do you understand of the theory? He might say in Arabic, نظرية. But what does نظرية mean? You know, so you need to have a clear concept of this particular and important word. Now, in modern science, the term theory or scientific theory is generally understood to refer to a proposed explanation of empirical phenomena made in a way consistent with scientific method. Now, for the time being, what I would like you to understand is it is an explanation of what? Of a phenomena. A phenomena. You see something, you have explanation for this phenomena. Why is this? You have an explanation for it. There is, you see something happening, and this is a phenomena, and then you have your own idea, your own explanation of this phenomena. Now, this is the meaning of the term theory in ancient Greek philosophy and in modern science. Now, how can we define theory, or what is the definition of theory? A theory is an explanation of a phenomenon, the perception of system and order in something observed. If you see something, if you notice something, then you have an explanation of it. It is, you can make a theory of this phenomena, an explanation. Now, what else? Okay, it is an explanation of a phenomenon. It exists in the mind. This is very important. A theory exists in the mind because it is an abstract. It has no tangible manifestation. You can't touch it. You can't see it. It's not concrete. It is simply an idea which constitutes the internal representation of a phenomenon. If you see a phenomenon in the real world and you want to make a theory, or a theory is a representation of this phenomena, it is internal, not external. Now, this is the definition of a theory. So please try to understand it and what it means exactly. It is an explanation of a phenomenon. It exists in the mind. It is not tangible. It is not concrete. You don't see it. It is internal. Now, these two terms, theory and a model, go parallel to each other. But the definition of a model, what is a model? A model is in contrast with what? With the theory. An external rather than an internal representation of the explanation, a realization of the theory. Excellent definition of a model. A model is the realization of your theory. You have a theory, how can you carry it out in the real world? You have to create a model. it exists as a tangible object, like a diagram or a formula or a text, which stands for the idea embodied in the theory. So the difference between a model and the theory, a theory is internal, a model is external. The theory is an explanation, the model is a realization of this explanation. How can we realize it? Either by drawing a diagram or writing up a formula or writing a text. For instance, we have a theory of the railway network in the kingdom. The model for this railway network in the kingdom is represented by the railway or the network starting from Dammam, going through Hufuf, and then going to Riyadh. This is a network. This is the realization of a theory. This is a model. This is a model of the theory of a railway network. Now you understand now, we understand now the difference between the theory and the model. It is important to know the main characteristics of a useful model. A model should faithfully represent the theory that it stands for. It means it should really copy the theory, but in tangible terms, in concrete terms. It should represent the theory it stands for. It also must do this by revealing significant characteristics of the phenomena explained by the theory. The model should give us the features, the characteristics, the qualities of the phenomenon explained by the theory. Not only that, it must have a heuristic function, making it easier to grasp the explanation, the theory, and doing that in a way which makes further studies easier and leads to deeper understanding. In other words, the model should give us guidelines to do more studies, to do more models, to investigate the theory more. It gives us more explanation. It makes it easier for us to do more studies on this particular model or theory. Now, the main characteristics of a theory. The following criteria of a theory are essential if you really want to do any research, if you want to go on in your studies, whether to do a master's degree or a PhD degree. You need to have these criteria in front of you. They help you a lot in doing and carrying out your research, whatever it is, whether you are doing a master's or a BA or a PhD. Now, any theory, ideally of course, must have or must reflect the following criteria. Empiricism. It must be testable. In other words, if you want to have a theory, this theory you should be able to test it by empirical means, by doing like questionnaires, tests, interviews, and so on. This is an empirical study. Now, another characteristic, determinism. Now, the theory must be able to predict. So you need to have the tools to predict what you do in your research. Parsimony, the theory must be really simple, not complicated, not difficult, not complex. It should be simple to make us able to carry it out, to make a model out of it. If it is too complicated, we cannot create a model, can we? But if it is simple and straightforward, we can make models of this theory. And the last important characteristics of a theory is that generality. You need to have a theory which you can generalize. In other words, the theory should be really comprehensive, covers a large area of the field it is interested in, or it concerns itself with. So these are the main characteristics of a good theory, or ideally a perfect theory. So you need really to understand these terms: empiricism, determinism, parsimony, and generality. So, very important, even for the exam. For the exam, they are very important. Now, having gone through all the above mentioned points, now we have some kind of a clear idea of what a theory in general terms means. Now we come to the main question of this lecture. What is translation theory? Translation theory is a statement of general principles. General principle based upon reasoned argument and supported by evidence that is intended to explain a particular fact, event, or phenomenon. Very simple, straightforward. This is a theory in general terms. Now, a theory of translation, like any other theory, should conform as far as possible to the following. A theory of translation should use or should have the following criteria. Empiricism. It means you need to be able to use empirical tools to apply your theory. Determinism. It means you have to be able to predict. Parsimony. A theory of translation needs to be simple. Again, a theory of translation should be comprehensive. Now, based on the above mentioned concept of theory, so first one is the concept of theory, then the characteristics of a good theory. Now Bell suggests 3 possible theories of translation depending on the focus of investigation. It depends on what you are investigating. Now, he claims that we can have a theory of translation as process, i.e., a theory of translating. And number 2, a theory of translation as product, theory of translated text. And number 3, a theory of translation as both process and product. A theory of translating and translation. Now, a theory of translating means it is an explanation of what's going on in the translator's mind, processor. A theory of translation as a product, it means a theory, an explanation of the translated text. You have a text and you have a theory of this phenomenon. So you have to have an explanation of how this text comes about. Or the last theory, which is very popular now, people look at translation as process and product. You have to look at the at the translation as a theory of translating and the translation. In other words, process and product. It means translating and the translated text. And it means what's going on in your mind and what you can see on the text. So this is a theory of translation as process and product. This is in general, very briefly, by the way. I have given you what we mean by a theory of translation. Now, I would like really to finish off this lecture by Peter Newmarks' concept of theory of translation. I'm sure you must have heard by now of Peter Newmarks. Peter Newmarks is a very, very well-known theorist and practitioner of translation, and he has written many books. So I really recommend, if you are interested in doing translation or becoming a translator later on in your life, I advise you to have some idea about his writing. And his writings are, very recent, so not as as old as other writers. Now, it is really very simple. Look at it. Translation theory is the body of knowledge. A beautiful word, the body of knowledge that we have about translating, extending from general principles to guidelines, suggestions and hints. This is what the translation theory is. Very clear. A body of knowledge. It is the knowledge that contains what? Contains general principles, guidelines, suggestions, and even hints about translation. So, this is the last point of this lecture, which summarizes the concept of theory of translation to us. I would like to thank you very much for listening and following me in this lecture. Thank you.